man ignores you, many people assume it means he is powerful, confident, or simply uninterested. But the truth is often much deeper than that. One of the greatest weaknesses behind a man who ignores someone is emotional immaturity. Emotional maturity is the ability to recognize feelings, communicate honestly, and handle difficult situations with clarity. When a person lacks that maturity, silence becomes their easiest escape. A mature man understands that communication is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Whether the relationship is romantic, personal, or even professional, respect is shown through honesty. When something is wrong, a mature person talks about it. When something changes, they express it. But a man who ignores you avoids that responsibility completely. Instead of having an uncomfortable conversation, he chooses distance and silence because it feels easier. Ignoring someone can seem powerful on the surface, but it is often a mask for discomfort. Many people who ignore others are not actually strong enough to face emotional conversations. Talking about feelings requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. A man who has not developed emotional maturity may find it extremely difficult to express what he feels. So rather than admitting confusion, fear, or uncertainty, he simply disappears or becomes silent. Think about it for a moment. It takes very little effort to ignore someone. Anyone can stop replying to messages, avoid phone calls, or pretend someone doesn't exist. But it takes character to say, this is how I feel, or this is what I want, or even this relationship is not working for me. Those words require honesty and responsibility. A person who ignores you often avoids those words because they are not ready to take accountability for their emotions or their decisions. Another part of emotional immaturity is the inability to handle conflict in a healthy way. Every relationship has moments of disagreement, misunderstanding, or emotional tension. Mature individuals understand that these moments are normal. They sit down, talk about the issue, and work through it. But someone who lacks emotional maturity sees conflict as something to escape from. Ignoring you becomes their strategy to avoid dealing with the problem. The problem with this behavior is that it creates confusion and emotional stress for the other person. When someone suddenly becomes silent, the mind naturally begins to search for answers. You might start wondering if you said something wrong, if you did something to upset them, or if the relationship itself was never important to them. This uncertainty can make a person feel insecure or anxious, even though the real issue lies with the other person's inability to communicate. Emotionally mature people understand that clarity is a form of respect. Even if the truth is uncomfortable, giving someone an honest explanation shows that you value them enough to communicate openly. But when a man ignores you, he removes that clarity. He leaves you with unanswered questions. Not because you deserve confusion, but because he does not have the emotional tools to handle the situation properly. Another sign of emotional immaturity is the tendency to run from responsibility. Communication requires responsibility because it forces a person to explain their actions and intentions. If a man tells you how he feels, he must stand behind those words. If he admits he made a mistake, he must take responsibility for it. But ignoring someone allows him to avoid all of that. Silence becomes a shield that protects him from difficult conversations and emotional accountability. This kind of behavior often reveals someone who has not learned how to manage emotions in a healthy way. Instead of facing discomfort, they escape it. Instead of resolving tension, they avoid it. Instead of building understanding, they create distance. Over time, this pattern makes meaningful relationships almost impossible because deep connections require emotional openness. People who are emotionally mature know that silence cannot solve problems. Problems do not disappear simply because they are ignored. In fact, silence often makes things worse because it allows misunderstandings to grow. The longer communication is avoided, the more confusion and emotional distance develops between two people. It is also important to understand that emotional maturity is closely connected to self-awareness. A self-aware person understands their own feelings and can explain them to others. They know when they are hurt, when they are frustrated, and when they need space. But someone who lacks self-awareness may not even fully understand their own emotions. Because they cannot explain what they feel, they choose silence instead. Ignoring someone can sometimes be a way of hiding emotional confusion. If a man does not understand what he wants, what he feels, or where the relationship is going, he may withdraw. instead of expressing that uncertainty. Unfortunately, that silence shifts the emotional burden onto the other person, leaving them to deal with the confusion alone. Another reason emotional immaturity leads to ignoring behavior is fear of difficult reactions. Honest conversations sometimes lead to disappointment, sadness, or disagreement. Someone who lacks emotional strength may fear those reactions so much that they avoid the conversation entirely. Ignoring you feels safer to them because it delays confrontation. But avoiding confrontation is not the same as solving a problem. In reality, it is simply postponing emotional growth. Mature individuals understand that growth often happens through uncomfortable conversations. Talking openly about feelings may feel difficult in the moment, but it ultimately builds stronger understanding and deeper trust. When a man chooses to ignore instead of communicate, he reveals that he has not yet developed the emotional skills needed for a healthy relationship. Relationships require patience, honesty, empathy, and the willingness to listen as well as speak. Without those qualities, communication breaks down and silence becomes a substitute for emotional effort. Understanding this can completely change the way you view the situation. Instead of interpreting silence as proof that you are not valuable, you begin to see it as a reflection of the other person's limitations. Emotional immaturity is not something you can fix for someone else. It is something they must recognize and develop within themselves. A person who ignores others may believe they are avoiding problems, but in reality, they are revealing their inability to face them. True emotional strength is not shown through silence or distance. It is shown through the courage to communicate honestly, even when the conversation is uncomfortable, uncertain, or difficult. When a man ignores you, many people assume it simply means he does not care. While that can sometimes be true, another deeper reason often lies behind this behavior: the need to maintain control. For some men, ignoring someone becomes a way to manage the emotional dynamic of the relationship. It is not always about a lack of feelings. Instead, it can be about power, influence, and control over how the other person reacts. Control in relationships does not always appear in obvious ways. Sometimes it shows up through silence, distance, or inconsistency. When a man chooses to ignore you, he may be creating a situation where you start questioning yourself. You might begin wondering if you did something wrong, if you said something that upset him, or if you should try harder to regain his attention. This internal questioning slowly shifts the balance of power in the relationship. A person who wants control understands that uncertainty can create emotional dependence. When attention is given and then suddenly taken away, it can trigger a strong emotional response. Human beings naturally seek clarity and connection. When that connection is suddenly removed, it can create anxiety and confusion. A man who uses silence as a strategy may know that this emotional reaction can cause the other person to chase his approval or attention. This pattern is sometimes referred to as a push and pull dynamic. One moment he may show interest, affection, or attention. The next moment he becomes distant, silent, or unavailable. That sudden change keeps the other person emotionally off balance. Instead of feeling secure in the relationship, they feel uncertain about where they stand. That uncertainty can lead them to invest even more energy into trying to fix the situation. But a healthy relationship does not operate on confusion or emotional games. Real connection is built on consistency. When someone truly values you, their behavior reflects stability rather than unpredictability. They do not create emotional puzzles for you to solve. Instead, they communicate clearly and show through their actions that they respect your presence in their life. A man who relies on ignoring as a method of control often believes that attention is a form of currency. He may feel that by withholding it, he increases his value in the relationship. In his mind, the less available he appears, the more the other person will want him. This belief is rooted in insecurity rather than genuine confidence. Truly confident individuals do not feel the need to manipulate attention in order to maintain interest. Control through silence can also appear when someone wants to avoid accountability. If a man has done something wrong, hurt someone, or created tension in the relationship, ignoring the situation may seem easier than facing it. By disappearing or becoming silent, he avoids the conversation that would require him to explain himself or accept responsibility. In that moment, silence becomes a shield that protects him from criticism or emotional discomfort. Another reason control may appear through ignoring. Behavior is the desire to test the other person's loyalty or patience. Some men intentionally withdraw to see how the other person reacts. They may watch to see if she will call, text, apologize, or try to reconnect. In their mind, this reaction confirms how much she cares. But this type of testing creates unnecessary emotional stress and weakens trust within the relationship. Healthy relationships do not require constant testing. When trust exists, both people feel secure enough to communicate openly rather than creating situations that force the other person to prove their feelings. Testing someone through silence is often a sign that the person creating the test does not fully trust the stability of the connection. Control can also come from fear of losing emotional independence. Some men worry that becoming too emotionally involved in a relationship will make them vulnerable or dependent. To protect their sense of independence, they create distance whenever the connection begins to feel too close. Ignoring someone becomes a way to reestablish control over their own emotions and the direction of the relationship. In this situation, the silence is not always meant to hurt the other person. Instead, it reflects the individual's struggle with balancing intimacy and independence. However, regardless of the intention, the result often creates emotional confusion for the person on the receiving end. The sudden withdrawal can feel like rejection, even if the other person is simply trying to regain a sense of control over their feelings. Another aspect of control through ignoring behavior is the belief that silence creates mystery or desirability. Some people believe that being less available makes them appear more valuable or attractive. They think that responding quickly, communicating openly, or showing consistent interest will reduce their appeal. As a result, they intentionally create distance to maintain a sense of mystery. While a small amount of independence can be healthy in any relationship, intentional emotional distance can damage trust. Relationships grow through openness, shared experiences, and honest communication. When silence becomes a regular strategy, it prevents the relationship from developing deeper understanding and emotional safety. Control-based ignoring behavior can also reflect a deeper struggle with insecurity. Someone who feels uncertain about their own value may try to control the relationship dynamic to avoid feeling rejected. By keeping the other person slightly uncertain or emotionally invested, they feel reassured that they are still desired. This reassurance temporarily protects their ego, but it does not create a stable or respectful connection. Over time, relationships built on control rather than mutual respect tend to become exhausting. One person is constantly trying to figure out the emotional signals, while the other maintains distance to preserve their sense of power. Instead of feeling supported and appreciated, both individuals may begin to feel frustrated and misunderstood. Understanding this dynamic changes the perspective of the person being ignored. Instead of immediately assuming that the silence means they are not important, they can recognize that the behavior may be connected to the other person's need for control or emotional security. This awareness helps prevent unnecessary self-blame and allows them to evaluate whether the relationship dynamic is truly healthy. Strong relationships are not built on control. They are built on trust, communication, and mutual respect. When two people value each other, they do not need to manipulate attention or create emotional uncertainty to maintain interest. They show up consistently, communicate honestly, and allow the connection to grow naturally without games or silent power struggles. Another important truth behind a man who ignores you is that silence often hides fear. Many people assume that ignoring someone means confidence or indifference, but in reality, it can be the opposite. Sometimes the man who withdraws, avoids messages, or becomes distant is not doing it because he feels nothing. He may be doing it because he feels too much and does not know how to handle it. One of the biggest challenges for many people, especially in emotional relationships, is vulnerability. Vulnerability means allowing another person to see your real feelings. It means admitting that someone matters to you. It means opening the door to the possibility that you could be hurt, rejected, or misunderstood. For a lot of people, that level of emotional exposure feels uncomfortable or even frightening. Instead of leaning into that discomfort and communicating honestly, they protect themselves by creating distance. Ignoring someone can become a shield against emotional risk. When a man keeps his distance or stays silent, he does not have to reveal what is happening inside his mind. He does not have to admit that he is confused, unsure, or emotionally affected. Silence allows him to maintain a sense of control over his own feelings, while avoiding the vulnerability that real connection requires. Many people grow up learning that showing emotions is a sign of weakness. They may hear messages that tell them to stay strong, not to show feelings, and not to appear emotionally dependent on anyone. Over time, these beliefs can shape how someone behaves in relationships. Even when they care deeply about another person, they may struggle to express that care openly. Ignoring someone becomes a way of protecting their image of strength. However, the truth is that real emotional strength comes from honesty, not avoidance. Being able to say how you feel requires courage. It means trusting that the other person will listen, even if the conversation becomes uncomfortable. It means accepting that relationships involve risk, but also understanding that the reward of genuine connection is worth that risk. When a man avoids vulnerability, he may convince himself that distance keeps him safe. If he does not fully invest emotionally, he believes he cannot be hurt. If he does not reveal his feelings, he believes he cannot be rejected. In his mind, ignoring someone is a way of maintaining emotional protection. But emotional protection through silence often comes at a cost. While it may temporarily reduce his fear, it also prevents the relationship from developing depth and trust. True intimacy grows when two people are willing to share their thoughts, fears, and hopes with each other. When one person consistently avoids that openness, the relationship remains stuck on the surface. Fear of vulnerability can also appear when someone has experienced emotional pain in the past. If a man has been hurt before, betrayed, or rejected, he may carry those memories into new relationships. Those experiences can create a protective instinct that encourages distance. When he begins to feel emotionally close to someone again, the old fear may return, reminding him of the possibility of being hurt. Instead of facing that fear directly, he may unconsciously repeat protective patterns. Ignoring messages, creating emotional distance, or withdrawing from conversations can become automatic reactions designed to prevent deeper attachment. From the outside, this behavior may appear cold or uncaring, but internally it may be driven by a desire to avoid repeating past pain. Another aspect of vulnerability is the fear of commitment. Commitment requires emotional investment, time, and responsibility. It means acknowledging that another person plays an important role in your life. For some individuals, that level of responsibility feels overwhelming. They worry that commitment will limit their freedom or expose them to emotional disappointment. When those fears arise, ignoring someone can feel like an easy solution. By keeping the connection uncertain, they avoid fully stepping into the responsibilities that come with a committed relationship. They remain emotionally close enough to maintain the connection, but distant enough to avoid complete vulnerability. This pattern often creates confusion for the other person. One moment, the connection may feel strong, warm, and meaningful. The next moment, the man becomes distant or silent. The sudden shift can leave the other person questioning what changed or what went wrong. In many cases, the change is not caused by anything the other person did. It is triggered by the internal fear of emotional exposure. Fear of vulnerability can also affect communication during difficult moments. When disagreements or misunderstandings happen, vulnerability requires honesty about feelings and perspectives. It means listening to the other person and expressing your own emotions clearly. For someone who fears vulnerability, these conversations can feel extremely uncomfortable. Instead of facing the discussion, they may choose silence. Ignoring messages or avoiding conversations allows them to escape the emotional intensity of the situation. While this may reduce immediate discomfort, it prevents the problem from being resolved. The unresolved tension can slowly weaken the relationship over time. Another important aspect of vulnerability is the willingness to be seen as imperfect. Opening up emotionally means admitting mistakes, acknowledging insecurities, and accepting that you do not always have the right answers. For someone who strongly values control or pride, admitting these imperfections can feel threatening. Ignoring someone becomes a way to avoid exposing those imperfections. By staying silent, they avoid conversations that might reveal uncertainty, mistakes, or emotional need. Unfortunately, this avoidance also blocks the possibility of deeper understanding and emotional growth within the relationship. People who fear vulnerability often struggle with the balance between desire and protection. They may genuinely want connection, companionship, and love, but they also fear the emotional risks that come with those experiences. This internal conflict can create confusing behavior patterns where interest and distance appear in cycles. Understanding this dynamic can change the way someone interprets being ignored. Instead of seeing the silence purely as rejection, it may be recognized as a sign of emotional fear or insecurity. This does not mean the behavior is healthy or acceptable, but it helps explain why it occurs. True connection requires both people to gradually lower their emotional defenses. It requires patience, honesty, and the willingness to be vulnerable with each other. When one person consistently hides behind silence, that process becomes difficult. The relationship cannot fully grow because openness is only happening on one side. Ignoring someone may temporarily protect a person from emotional risk, but it also limits their ability to experience the deeper rewards of a meaningful relationship. The fear that drives the silence may feel protective in the moment, yet it quietly prevents the very connection that many people ultimately desire. One of the deepest weaknesses of a man who ignores you is that he underestimates your worth. When someone believes they can disappear, remain silent, or give you inconsistent attention without losing you, it usually means they assume you will always stay. This assumption does not always come from arrogance alone. Sometimes it grows slowly through patterns that develop in the relationship over time. When a person repeatedly ignores you and nothing changes, they begin to believe that their behavior has no consequences. Human beings naturally test boundaries in relationships even without realizing it. If someone sends a message and you respond immediately every time, they learn that you will always be available. If they disappear for days and return without explanation and everything continues as normal, they learn that silence will be accepted. Over time, these repeated patterns form expectations. The person who ignores you begins to believe that your patience, your understanding, and your presence will always remain the same no matter how they behave. When a man underestimates your worth, he often stops appreciating the emotional effort you bring into the relationship. Your time, your care, your attention, and your loyalty slowly become things he expects instead of things he values. Instead of recognizing them as gifts, he begins to treat them as guarantees. That shift in perception is where the real weakness appears, because once appreciation disappears, respect often begins to fade as well. Ignoring someone can be a reflection of that lack of appreciation. If a man truly understands the value of a person in his life, he rarely risks losing them through careless behavior. He understands that meaningful connections are not easy to find and that trust takes time to build. But when someone believes that you will always remain no matter what they do, they may start acting without considering how their behavior affects you. Underestimating someone's worth also means misunderstanding their strength. A man who ignores you may believe that your patience means weakness. He may assume that your willingness to forgive, your kindness, or your emotional openness means you will tolerate anything. What he fails to recognize is that patience and kindness are not signs of weakness, they are signs of emotional maturity. People who are emotionally mature often give others the benefit of the doubt. They try to understand situations before reacting. They allow room for mistakes because they value connection and growth. But that patience should never be confused with a lack of self-respect. When someone repeatedly ignores your presence, your feelings, or your efforts, there comes a moment when patience turns into clarity. That clarity changes the dynamic completely. The moment you begin to recognize your own value, the power balance in the relationship shifts. Suddenly, the silence that once felt confusing begins to look like information. Instead of asking yourself why someone is ignoring you, you begin asking whether someone who behaves that way deserves your energy at all. When a man underestimates your worth, he assumes your presence is permanent. He believes that no matter how distant he becomes, you will still be there when he returns. This belief allows him to take emotional risks without fear of losing the connection. He may disappear, ignore messages, or give minimal effort because he assumes that your feelings will remain unchanged. But every relationship depends on mutual effort. Attention, respect, and communication must move in both directions. When only one person consistently invests emotional energy, the relationship slowly becomes unbalanced. The person who is giving begins to feel drained, while the person who is ignoring becomes increasingly comfortable with the imbalance. Another reason underestimating someone's worth becomes a weakness is that it blinds a person to the reality of what they might lose. When you are used to someone always being present, it becomes easy to overlook the unique qualities they bring into your life. Their support, their encouragement, their understanding, and their loyalty start to feel ordinary instead of extraordinary. Only when that presence is gone do some people begin to realize its true value. The silence that once came from them suddenly returns in a different form. Instead of ignoring, they are now the ones experiencing absence. The attention they once received without effort is no longer available. The conversations, the care, and the emotional support they once took for granted are no longer part of their daily life. This realization can be surprising because they never expected the dynamic to change. They believed that their behavior had no real consequences. They assumed that the connection would remain stable regardless of how little effort they gave. That assumption was built on the belief that the other person would never walk away. But self-respect transforms how people respond to being ignored. When someone truly understands their worth, they begin to protect their emotional energy. They stop chasing attention that is not freely given. They stop explaining their value to people who refuse to recognize it. Instead, they redirect their energy toward environments and relationships where respect and appreciation exist naturally. The moment someone chooses self-respect over constant pursuit, the illusion of control disappears. The man who once believed he held all the power through silence realizes that the dynamic has changed. Ignoring no longer produces the same reaction. The emotional attention he once received easily is no longer guaranteed. This is why underestimating someone's worth is such a powerful weakness. It causes a person to behave carelessly towards something valuable. When someone assumes that loyalty, kindness, and patience will always remain available, they stop nurturing the connection that makes those qualities possible. Healthy relationships thrive when both people recognize each other's value. Appreciation leads to effort, effort leads to trust, and trust leads to stability. When one person ignores the importance of the other, that balance begins to break. Real strength in relationships comes from recognizing the worth of the person standing beside you. It means understanding that respect must be shown consistently, not occasionally. It means appreciating the presence of someone who chooses to be part of your life, rather than assuming they will always remain there no matter how they are treated. The man who ignores you may believe he holds the advantage because he controls the attention in the moment. But the deeper truth is that the real power belongs to the person who understands their own value. Once someone sees their worth clearly, they stop accepting treatment that diminishes it, and the silence that once felt powerful loses its meaning entirely.